Hello, everyone. My name's Eric Johnson, and welcome back to the today's episode of Logtech Live. I am joining you here from lovely Charleston, South Carolina, where I have an amazing view of the harbor. I've seen about, I think, by my last count, 5 or 6 container ships rolling by, literally right outside my hotel window. So getting a front row seat to global trade is pretty cool, especially at this moment where we're sort of front and center of all things global economy in the global economy right now. So today, we have a great show lined up. I'm going to be joined in a bit by Alex Griffin, CEO of BlueCargo, to discuss technology as sort of a key to unlock congestion in California's ports. But before that, first I wanted to, as always, thank our sponsor each month, Chain.io. Without them, we wouldn't be able to put this on. Thanks again to Sarah and her team at Let's Talk Supply Chain, as obviously, for allowing me to do this show each month. I really have a fun time doing this. So I really appreciate everyone who supports this. And obviously, everyone who's tuning in today, thank you so much for making time wherever you are in the world. So before I get it started, we are 3 weeks away, unbelievably, from TPM Tech and TPM, which are starting February 24th in Long Beach, right in within a few meters of those congested ports that we're going to discuss today. Can't wait to be on site. Can't wait to see everyone who's attending. Just a lot of excitement from our end, from everyone I'm talking to about doing things in person again. Obviously, there could not be a more important time for us all to gather. The supply chain. You know how much I hate that term. Supply chains have been a mess the last year and a half. So hopefully, this will be a chance for us all to get together and really figure out how to improve things. And I'll be obviously looking at it from a tech perspective. So if you haven't signed up yet and are on the fence, just go to events.joc.com/TPM to find out how to register for both of those events. I believe there's a discount code that watchers of this show, it's right up there. If you have any issues with that, just email me at eric.johnson@ihs.market. ihsmarket.com. I can't believe I can't remember my email address anymore. That's vacation. That's what vacation brain will do to you. So it's eric.johnson@ihsmarket with an I.com. So let's launch in. There's a lot of news as usual. It is the normal fire hose of activity. I think I lost track once again of the number of funding rounds that I've written about since the start of the year, but it's completely ridiculous and off the rails. I think there was three funding rounds I wrote about just last week. But I'm going to start off with a story that that actually just posted yesterday. It's about a company called BlueX Trade that is based in the Bay Area in Taiwan that's been helping some shipping lines with kind of instant quoting capability. They launched a product yesterday to kind of provide a payment mechanism for all parties that are transacting in international logistics. And the interesting thing is not just that they sort of branched out from providing an instant quoting platform into this ancillary kind of service. It's that this is just the tip of the iceberg. I think I've written over the last 6 weeks maybe 4 or 5 times about different companies, whether it be standalone software providers, payment software specialists, or even individual forwarders offering some capability around payment. So this is obviously an area that is going from, and payment meaning electronic payment, and electronic payment not meaning ACH payments between 2 banks, where it can take days to process and clear. We're talking about kind of Venmo, PayPal type of environments, and really influenced by the impact of companies like Stripe and Square and Brex that have sort of revolutionized or are revolutionizing the way payments and international payments can be transacted. So we're seeing that bleed into logistics big time. And I think we're going to look back at 22 and see this is the year when we got rid of paper checks, or we started to get rid of paper checks, and we started to think of bank-to-bank ACH payments as quite antiquated. So next story I wanted to point to was by my colleague Peter Tershwell. He wrote a column that posted yesterday that I thought was super interesting, and this isn't really tech related specifically, but it totally touches on what I'm going to be talking with Alex about in a few minutes, which is everything that we're seeing right now from a supply chain perspective. Well, I shouldn't say everything. There's obviously labor issues at various nodes in the supply chain, especially in warehousing, a little bit in trucking. COVID is having an impact on the docks as well. But everything that we've been reading about all year and what we've been writing about at thejoc.com week to week is about congestion in ports, right? Everything from containers stacking up, difficulty in returning empties, which we'll dig into in a bit, detention, demurrage fees piling up, lack of chassis, lack of availability to chassis, all of that. Peter tried to sort of wrap around this idea that we haven't really understood port acreage, that the land that ports actually occupy, as being the most important pieces of property probably in the American economy. If those ports are not being utilized correctly, if tech is not in place to make them fluid, if operations are gunked up, if labor is an issue, it has ripple effects all the way back to origin and all the way downstream to what consumers buy and what production plants are able to produce. So I encourage you to go and look this story up. It's a really insightful kind of view, and it really crystallizes our idea. It's not about finger pointing, as a lot of other coverage we've seen has been. It's about just all of us viewing this acreage, which traditionally has been extremely expensive and hard to come by, as sacred as it should be sort of seen. So I encourage you to all look at that, and we'll obviously be getting more into the mess in LA and Long Beach in a second. So the next story I wanted to point out was a story I did a couple weeks back around, and this stemmed from a webcast that we did in mid-January. Hopefully some of you caught that, where we touched upon standardization in the industry, and specifically some initiatives that ocean carriers have been pushing to drive standardization through an organization called the DCSA, which you may have heard me reference in the past year. We had a representative, the CEO of DCSA, and the most interesting thing for me that came out of this webcast, and I wrote about it here, is the very companies that commission the DCSA and are paying for the DCSA to develop standards are not adopting those standards that they asked to be developed and are paying for, right? And that is slowing down standardization of processes, of track and trace, of electronic bills of lading, right? So you have this environment where different companies are using different sort of formats, everything from what a port is called from a code perspective to really more complex kind of processes. The more diverse those codes and processes and formats are, the harder it is, right? It just means a software company that's sitting in between two commercial partners has to sort of do some translation work instead of just building products based on a set of standards. So maybe I'll get Alex's thought on that issue, and whether software providers are supposed to provide that sort of standardization or whether the industry would benefit from some more standardization. But I thought that was an interesting thing to kind of unpack a little bit. So I encourage you to take a look at that. And then lastly, before I bring Alex on, the last thing I'll point to is my latest newsletter on Substack, which came out last Friday, where I sort of took a look. I was on the road for the first time in a long time last week at the Manifest show in Las Vegas, which I met like 100 people that I hadn't seen in 2-3 years. It was great. But it got me thinking about the weird permutations of travel, right? Business travel. And in this newsletter, I sort of talk about how our expectations around what we can cancel when we travel is different depending on whether we're talking about an airplane ticket or a rental car, and how that overlays over our expectations about what we can cancel in terms of logistics. So traditionally, for instance, a shipper in a totally different environment could make 3 bookings with different carriers and no show on 2 of them, and there would be no repercussions. Just like a rental car, right? I could book 10 rental cars right now for tomorrow, not pick up any of them, and I don't pay any penalty. There's no repercussions, right? So that's obviously changing. The leverage is changing, the dynamics are changing, the data around the industry is changing. So we'll be in this newsletter, I take a crack at trying to understand like what that means. So I encourage you as well to read that. Okay, so with no further ado, it's time to bring our guest this month on. Alex Griffin is CEO of a company called BlueCargo, and they're based in Southern California. And Alex, so glad you could join us this morning. Thanks for being up nice and early on the West Coast. Glad you could join us.
Yeah, thank you so much for the invitation, Eric, and also exciting for TPM Tech coming soon, where we'll be doing a panel together on the technology solutions for D&D.
For sure, yeah. I'm really excited to have you on a panel talking about some of the detention demurrage issues that shippers and their partners face. And really excited you can be there. It's in your backyard, so really glad you could join us. So why don't you for those listeners or viewers right now who are not familiar with BlueCargo, can you give us a little background on the company and also yourself? Like, what was your path to founding this company that is focused on a very interesting wrinkle in the ports?
Absolutely. So maybe for the background first, it all started there. So it made sense for my co-founder and I to start in America's busiest port in LA Long Beach. So our background, we actually met during our last year of study in Berkeley. And so when we were there, super close to the port of Oakland, we really digged into the inside of port operations. So our background really comes from trying to solve the terminal stacking strategy through an algorithm perspective. So in our last year of masters, we worked with Navis, the terminal operating system, on really how to help moving boxes faster from the yard to the trucking companies. So that's where we are coming from. And then we engage with trucking companies, Drayage trucking companies, and really identified a couple of pain points. And the first one we're going to talk about is around the empty returns of containers. So it's something we wanted to help with. So our mission is really to help moving the containers faster and more reliably from the port terminal to the first warehouse. So of course, helping the Drayage trucking companies first, but anyone who's trying to move those boxes and get visibility into what's happening at the port terminal level. So that's where we come from. And today, what BlueCargo is a SaaS platform helping any logistics company move containers in and out of maritime ports faster, more reliably, and more cost effectively. So today we work with about 600 trucking companies, brokers, and importers, and they rely on BlueCargo's real-time data platform to dispatch any of their containers moving through the two ports here, LA and Long Beach, and get visibility. It's really an operational platform. So it's not data, but it's always advising what's the next best move to keep your containers moving.
Got it. So just to be clear, are you, because I've sort of like written about what you do and had lots of discussions about how you sort of interact with other companies or systems, right? And so and tell me if I'm wrong on this, you sort of specialize in helping the return of empties, right? So you're helping find where those appointments of empty containers can be made to the right terminal according to the right shipping line. Is that correct?
Yes, so we're integrated to all the port terminals in LA Long Beach, and we integrate with the trucking companies we work with. So a few hundreds today. We help them with where and when to return their containers in real time, but also on time. So we help them trying to be proactive on preventing any per diem or late fees, and communicating that with their customer. So that's our initial value proposition for the past 2 years. And now we really have a system that helps through the whole flow So from the import pickup, knowing when is your container supposed to arrive and be available in the yard, is there any detention or demurrage at the import side, and how much is due, what can you do, what's the history of events that happen, so you can kind of audit trail back when was your container available, for how long was it due in demurrage, etc., and then suggest the next best move until the container is finally returned empty and terminated. And this data point is pretty important because that's really the end of the transaction, the moment the trucking company can get invoiced for its move, but also the moment the fee clock is stopping for good.
So that last piece, the audit trail, and having a sort of data-based approach to capturing when your free time sort of obligations have finished is super important. And this is something I actually wrote about middle of last year, because I had a couple importers telling me, we are, the market's crazy. We're dealing with new carriers, new NVOs. Our boxes are going to terminals that we don't normally use. Sometimes we're in a port that we don't normally use. We may have a really good system or process in place through one terminal with one carrier to track, when our free time the clock stops and starts. But as soon as we get involved with a different forwarder, different NVO going through a different terminal, our process is not consistent, and we have trouble, and therefore we have trouble sort of disputing what we believe to be incorrect things. So that audit as soon as we talked about this at the end of last year, my ears sort of perked up. So
yeah, I think there's really the fact that here in LA Long Beach, like a container can be returned to one of 12 port terminals,
right.
And the place, it's not like it was before, where the place where you picked up your container, you can just return it at. So you receive different streams of information. So first, the shipping line tells you by email which are his favorite terminals to return the containers, and then the terminals give you a different schedule. So the thing, and in a word before BlueCargo, dispatchers and import or return teams had to go through those emails from the shipping line and then all the terminal websites to see at any moment of time which one are accepting which type of empty returns. So the first layer of information is kind of what we call the empty return instructions. So which terminal is open and for what shift. But then when you find a terminal that's open for receiving, first you can have a restriction on dual. So it's only taking a container back if you pick up a full one at the same time. So assuming it's open for receiving, now you have to be booking an appointment. So if it's a dual and if you have a load coming out, you can match to make a dual transaction and match your full important appointment. Otherwise, you have to book separately an empty return appointment. And then you have the third layer of information, which is really if there's any chassis restriction. So what kind of chassis you can come with, your own chassis, WCCP or pool chassis. So all those layers are first very manual, or were very manual before us. So BlueCargo is like the Expedia or Kayak layer that the trucking company can look at everything that's available and choose the best spot for them, looking through all those layers of information at the same time. But also, this was really a black box before for shippers, like understanding the appointments, understanding the chassis restriction. And I see all the time they ask trucking companies questions about, like, why wasn't this container returned or picked up on time? What's the actual reason? And they send back emails trying to explain the restriction that happened on that specific day and time. So that's really what we're providing, like knowledge about what's happening and the reason why there's a cause to the late and what can be done about it.
Yeah, and obviously that capability could not be more timely right now. I think the empty return issue for anyone tracking in Southern California has been like front and center. But let's go back a couple years, because you were founded in 2018, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. So how did you hit upon the empty return issue when it was less sort of like, of a desperate situation and less about, on the front page of every newspaper now, right? How did you hit upon that particular issue?
Yeah. Yeah, it's really funny, in an entrepreneur journey that you at some point you found something earlier on that not a lot of people knew about. So I think the problem has always been here. Like the empty return problem has been here for a while, at least since appointment for empty returns are mandatory at the port. D&D problem has always been here. So what just happened in 2021 is that things escalated. Like things escalated so much that now everyone is aware of it. But from the place where we were, so trying to fix things, told you at the terminal level initially, so trying to optimize how we stack the boxes so that it's already prepared for the trucking company when they come, doing the housekeeping moves. It helped us really connect with the trucking companies, and just by engaging and talking to them, we realized that there were a lot of systems out there helping them with the imports, because everybody wants to track his imports. That's the container full of iPhones or Nikes or whatever important is in it. But nobody was really interested in the empty return. And when we looked at it from an operational standpoint, so really what kind of scheduling do you need to do, what kind of move, what kind of resources, we realized that the empty leg was just as hard as the full one, if not harder. And so, but they had, like, nobody was helping and nobody was really interested because the container is empty. So yeah, it's like exporting air. So when we looked at that, we were like, okay, this is really a huge pain point operationally speaking. We love solving real operational problems, and it's a complete blue space, because we would be the only one trying to find the first solution. So it all started there, and then we grew incrementally. So in 2019, we had a free website that was showing gate schedules, empty return transactions for free in one place for everyone. And it generated so much traction that we started building premium features on top of it. So ability to look at the appointments, ability to receive custom notifications. So be alerted when you're running out of free days or when there's a last minute change at the terminal and your plan is not going to be able to be maintained. And we're just like 4 hours before that. So we built on top of it. And it escalated to the point where today, I think the empty return has really been the number one problem. And it comes from the empty return restrictions and the lack of yard space. So COVID disruption exacerbated the existing challenges and pushed our supply chain to just the edge of its capacity. So the inability to return the empty container due to the lack of single appointment, the empty return instructions being closed, freezed up the chassis under them in the trucker yards, which prevents from picking up even the full import container as the per diem and demurrage clocks are ticking. So actually, the empty return blocking the import pickup is what really raised the awareness among everyone. And I think that's how we were able to grow so fast, because we had an operational solution, easy to use, that's like a SaaS platform, and linked to the use case. And so since 2019, we grew to 600 companies using the software.
Wow. I admit, I think the desperation of the last 2 years sort of really crystallized the value that you're trying to build more than because I think I was first introduced to you in 2019 and it didn't click for me. Right. And sometimes, I have a thick head. So sometimes it takes a few times before it like, oh, wow. Okay. I understand why that's important now. But, I think part of it is the next question I wanted to ask you, which is, I try to put myself in the shoes of someone who's sort of like in the market and trying to understand where to go to get data, to get applications, to who to partner with. And if you look at the ports right now, especially the ports of LA and Long Beach, I've called it this sort of mosaic of a really confusing mosaic of systems, right? You have the ports themselves The port optimizer out of Port of LA, Port of Long Beach is going to be launching its own one this month. You have each individual terminal has its own TOS. There are appointment systems. There's hardware that's associated with the terminals as well. Every drayage company has its own dispatch or TMS system. There's the shipper's own systems. There's warehousing systems that all of this has to interface with, right? Because if the warehouse can't accept it, the shipper and their representative maybe doesn't want to pick up the box. How can these all coexist, I guess, is the way I would ask, right? Like, because it seems to me sort of not optimal to have so many systems all having to interface with one another.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things to it. The first one for me is really that everybody could build their own system, everybody could build their own front end, as the only thing that matters is interoperability between the systems. So the key to the second part of your question, which is really how can they coexist, for me is just communications through API. And I think as an industry, we have tried and we've been early in the standardization. Talking about the EDIs, electronic data interchange before, that were meant to be a universal solution. But still, as each major company pushed its own EDI approaches, the supply chain was left with a fragmented ecosystem. So today there's more than 2,000 different approaches to EDI, and many of the most prominent enterprises have entire teams dedicated to making EDIs work. So we really need to learn from that, and today align on a simple API standardization that empowers transparency and actionable integrations among programs. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to do it with companies that are tech and operations company, and releasing our APIs. But I think this is really the key to unlocking the ecosystem and stopping working in silos. So, and of course, the second piece to it is if we're in a world where all the companies communicate via these APIs, then it will create a lot of new opportunities, a lot of new businesses, and any business can flourish as the data is the same and is consistent everywhere, because every system shares it. So to move, I think I looked at to move a container or goods from point A to point Z, you need like at least 12 parties involved, like physically. So you absolutely need to be able to communicate to each other, because you can't imagine to dream of the same system that's all over the world, from the party in China to the party in the US, but also in the US from the port terminal to the BCO. Like, none of those people have the same needs. So it's okay to have different systems as long as the data is consistent. And that's really the piece that we're missing right now. And we have entire teams cross-checking the data that's different from all the sources of information. That's one of the logics that is difficult for us, like who has the latest version of the information at any point of time. So yeah, API is really what's needed, because we can't have the same system from China to here, and from the Drayage trucking company to the BCO. And the second part, and what we're trying to do with our system, is also just make people able to communicate on it. So today, a thing that we've seen is that originally we were working with trucking companies, helping them pick up and return containers, and we realized that they were sharing screenshots of BlueCargo to their warehouse. So the reason being that warehouses are at 99% yard occupancy right now, average in Southern California. So they want to prioritize which container should they offload first from all the containers that are full in their yard, and which container can they get ready to be returned to the terminal. And today there's no such thing as advanced planning in the majority of them. And so basically just trucking companies wanted to share which appointments they've been able to book for the empty returns, which container types are easy to return those days, which ones are not. So the warehouse can prioritize which container to offload first, because they have a chance to be returned and not be sitting in their yard empty as all the other ones. So finding the key even within our system to let people like share links with a live view of what's happening is also helping before we have full API level integrations. So what I mean is that there's middle levels and steps toward this that can provide quick win ROI, and yeah, we should try to implement them as soon as possible to help alleviate the size of the urge right now.
So tons of interesting points there, especially the, that operational wrinkle of kind of how people were using your system, and then, figuring out how maybe people could collaborate more directly within the system rather than taking a static shot. And
Yes.
A couple points. So obviously we've heard tons over the last year, especially about like divergence between, a visibility provider has an ETA of a vessel at this point, or cargo availability predictive, kind of milestone at this point. An arrival notice generated directly from the shipping line totally conflicts with what the visibility provider says. To your point about, having to figure out what information is accurate and what is not. And then, I pointed earlier in the show to shipping lines not even embracing the standards that they commissioned to be developed yet, right? So those are the companies that are controlling capacity. And then a couple weeks ago, some of the largest BCOs in the U.S. Testified to the FMC that about their constraints from a data sharing perspective and what data, the elements they needed, and universally, all 6 of them said they're still overwhelmingly based on EDI, right? 95% plus, if not 100%, right? So to your point, you have all of these sort of different versions of EDI, the very definition of not standardized, no seeming urge to adopt API as the default kind of way for systems to communicate. So those are the customers who are always right, and meaning the shippers. And then on the other side, the companies controlling the capacity are not in any rush to standardize their data formats, right? So I'm looking at this as like, I talk to founders every single day who are doing amazing things, and yet the 2 biggest pools of entities who really define this market don't seem to be in any huge rush to change anything, really at its core, right? Am I way off on that?
No, I completely agree.
Yeah. Okay. Probably don't need to say anymore. Well, so I think along those lines, right? I think everybody, especially people and media outlets who've, come to cover what's going on in the ports of LA and Long Beach this past year, everybody wants a quick fix, right? Like, I think it's human nature, right? We want one solution, easy for us to understand, fix all of our problems, right? Is that realistic in a port complex that you've described and that I've described as being pretty complicated, right? I mean, is it realistic to say that there's one fix for all of this?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of ways to look at it, depending on if we're looking short term or long term, and the complexity that varies with it. Maybe just to your point earlier, I think this escalation during the crisis helped realize that we're only as strong as the weakest link. So and maybe it's the port and Drayage. So I think it impacted earnings of like major BCOs in a way they didn't expect. So there's a realization that that it needs to change, even like at the large corporations level, because it's impacting the day-to-day business now. And I think that's what 2021 brought to the table. Then in terms of win, and is there a simple win to the complex problem, again, it depends on time. So for the empty return and the situation right now, I think actually what would have been quick and I don't know if it's easy but quick is the container owners to propose sweeper services to return empty container backlog. So just as easy, instead of stacking containers for high in the streets here and moving containers by train from all over the country to these ports. So that's one. And second, I think we need, of course, new yard storage. So that might take a bit longer, but one that's digital enough so that there is a digital gate so that the clock on per diem stops when the container is actually returned. So that's really what's missing today. Also because this clock means for smaller companies can mean the clock for bankruptcy or the clock for a negative year. So it's as urgent as more empties are coming from all over the country to LA. So yeah, I think that was the quick wins and the easy solution. Then of course there's the larger scale that will only happen with time. For example, when the president came and suggested that we move to 24/7 operations, so there's a lot of it could really help if we were moving 24/7, but that's not something that can be solved in a day or even in a month. It requires major transformation that actually need technology to happen. So that's on the longer term.
Yeah. Super interesting. I mean, to your point about the weakest link, I think that's super important, what you mentioned, and I want to highlight that. When I started covering the ports of LA and Long Beach, which was almost 2 decades ago, I'm scared. I'm ashamed to admit at this point, but the idea that there would be any technology devoted to drayage drivers or operators was like laughable, right? They were quite literally, and to a certain extent still are, the afterthought after all of the other parties, right, in a chain. So but I think what you said was absolutely correct, which is if you're, in a year like last year, your financial success is dependent not on the strongest link in your chain, but the weakest, right? And we all saw what happened last year. So great points. So we're coming close to the end of our time today, but I love asking this question of technology founders. So I'm going to ask it in a couple different ways to you. So what is, coming from a technology background and moving into logistics, what's something that the world of logistics doesn't understand well about technology? Because, to this day, even we're 10 years into this sort of like VC boom in logistics, there's still a lot of skepticism. I come across it every single day in person and on LinkedIn. What's something that people don't understand?
First, that technology can really help them in a couple ways. So for that, it will help in operations, in actual operations. So there's something I don't understand, and it's the one thing that since I've been in the logistics is always striking me, is how much I hear people still now dreaming of one system that will do everything, and one front end that would rule the world when the world is like so different and there are so many discrepancies. So I think the piece that's missing is really understanding the API and how everything can be just communicated on the back end and just flowing where it needs to be at the moment where it needs to be, and everybody can look at the data the way he likes them to be presented. We can even imagine software like software like Tableau, where you build the way you want to look at your data. So that's one. And this will really empower this dozen of actors to communicate at any time so that goods never stop moving. So because we're talking about supply chain from China to here, we're talking about many different time zones, many different languages, many different culture and people. And so technology can actually reconcile, technology can translate languages, technology can be online 24/7. So it will create this non-stop communication, and maybe even be the unlocking key to the 24/7 operations of cargo flow. So I think that's really the first thing that struck me from the beginning, because I hear it every day. Like, we're gonna make that front end that's gonna be everywhere. So that's one. And second, maybe because from my experience with trucking companies, is that to me, trucking companies are the earliest marketplaces. It's trade is at the beginning of the world, and even if it was like completely physical at the beginning, it's just the first marketplaces and trade exchange place. So the thing that we're facing is that there is a limit. There is a limit that is calculable, countable, in the number of moves that a person can handle, because the process is so manual today. Like, a dispatcher maybe can only handle 100 containers a day, because you have to track and trace them across 12 different systems. Then you have to book appointments in 12 different ones. So you're just limited in your capacity. And this limit is what technology can also help to uplift. So technology can help scale the marketplaces. So if we are able to have one system, and that's what we're doing with BlueCargo, just batching and getting data source from a lot of different places, just to show it in a good front end, then we empower the existing operators to not deal with 100 containers a day, but 500 containers a day. So technology is the key to scaling. That's what startups are for, like scaling. So we can bring that to the market and to the operations, and collaborate with the existing people. And it's not like we are looking to hire, we are actually looking to hire new people in dispatch, in truckers, in drivers, like all day long. So it would be good to empower them.
Yeah, great answer. That convergence point of systems is so right. I that was a big fad 10, 11 years ago. I remember doing studies on system convergence. Like that thought idea has been around forever, and now there's infinitely more systems, right? So the idea of them all converging into one seems very fanciful. Well, Alex, thank you so much for joining me today. This was fascinating. I could have gone on for another half hour. Where can people reach you? What's the best way to get in touch with you or BlueCargo?
Yeah, so simply contact at bluecargo.io, or our website, bluecargo.io.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again for joining me, and look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks in TPM.
Yes, thank you so much. Have a good day.
Thank you. And speaking of TPM, Sarah mentioned on a comment here, and I'll also mention, she is going to be front and center at TPM Tech and TPM this year. We're doing some cool live TV segments on site, and she's doing what will be some really fun women on the street interviews. So make sure to check those out, either if you're in person at TPM or you're following along online. So a couple minutes to do our traditional wrap up segment. So dad joke of the month, as usual, supplied by my son. So here goes. You all ready? Why were the sheep's parents mad at their kid? Because he was being bad. He gave me that one while he was playing Roblox, so it's not his best work. He was distracted, but I'll have him work on it next month. But you get what you pay for. So real quickly, buzzword of the month that I wanted to dig into: digital twin. So this one I'm quite conflicted about. I think that at some point things like digital twin, so in other words, sort of I think of this as like a schematic, an electronic schematic version of a company's supply chain, as if we think of digital twins within our industry. And I think that building a digital twin is perfectly possible right now. I just don't know if the effort that goes into building one yields the output and the actionable output that people might expect from all the effort that goes into it. In other words, if you're building out a model that you can kind of run what if scenarios and model kind of alternative plans based on constraints in your system that are propping up today, like, is the effort to account for all of those things that could possibly go wrong and all of the different facets of your global supply chain, is the effort to build that you know, enough to justify, or I should say, is the effort more than offset by what you get out of it? I think the answer is going to be different for every company, right? Companies that are really adept at incorporating kind of digital models into their planning are going to be better at it. Companies that have been iterating off of digital twins for a while are going to be better at it. Those that are just starting today right now, I think are going to find a pretty big mountain to climb. So would love to talk more about this with anyone. You know where to reach me, eric.johnson@ihsmarket.com, at joc.com, at my Substack, ericjohnson.substack.com. Would love to see you at TPM in just a few short weeks. Thank you so much for attending today. Thanks again to the Let's Talk Supply Chain Network. Thanks again to Chain.io for sponsoring. And I look forward to seeing you the Friday after TPM for our next show. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your day and weekend.